Right then, let's get this show on the road. Hit that. Oh, there's the camera. Oh, I'm very, very light. There we go. Can we work this out so I'm not quite so completely whited out? I think it's just because of where I'm sat, actually. Oh well, either way. Not going to talk too loudly because my friend is still asleep upstairs and I am in her house. So let's just rock and roll as we usually do. Guys, gals and the gender fluid, it is, well, it's not Wednesday, and it's definitely not 8 PM, but it definitely is the BOTW What's Current stream. My name is Anthony Russell, and we are here this lovely Saturday morning, Saturday the 15th of April 2023, and I think it's time that we talk about the NIHL Final Four weekend. So greetings to you from Coventry. We're definitely not in BOTW Towers today. I arrived in town last night, so I am sat here at my friend's house, so big thanks, of course, to the Shipmans for putting up with me for another Coventry weekend. Hope you're all doing well. I've got one eye up here on the television because I've got the Sydney Ice Dogs and the Sydney Bears in the Sydney Derby rocking on up there as well. But we definitely have some stuff to talk about. So let's just make sure that we do appear to be rolling live. Everything appears to be ticking along, which is good. I'm just making sure all the various bits and let's make sure everything's working. Good morning to Andrew Day. Thank you very much for joining as always, sir. Let's make sure that stuff has gone through, so that's fine. We like that. Good morning, all. Let's just making sure that's all working on that front. But yes, Saturday morning, playoff morning, the end of the season is very, very much upon us here, and we have got two massive, massive games today. In fact, technically, three massive games, albeit one of them is not in Coventry. We, of course, have the second leg of the NIHL 2 North Cup final between the Telford Tigers and the Hull Jets. The Tigers going into that with a 5-2 lead on aggregate there. Of course, a big day for Telford as a club when you have the Tigers in the have the Tigers playing in the second semi-final tonight in Coventry. Morning to the folks from the NIHL events team. Good to see someone's logged into the YouTube account there, the Google account. Sorry, but yeah. So Hull and Telford will battle later today as well in the second leg of that cup final. Who will come out on top? Will Hull be able to pull back that 3-goal deficit that they have going into that second leg? And then, of course, we are here. We are here in Coventry. Where are we? We're about 9:20 in the morning. So the doors open in 2 hours and 40 minutes at the Sky Dome. 12 o'clock doors ahead of our 1:30 PM face-off, and that first semi-final between the Sheffield Steel Dogs and the Raiders IHC. Personally, I think that one is going to be a war of attrition. I know both teams are obviously travelling today. Was fortunate enough to speak to a couple of folks from within the Raiders, and I know they're very much kind of preparing themselves for a proper all-out battle for that one, and I do not blame them in the slightest. I know Sean Thompson said it to me yesterday, and it is very much an old adage here on BOTW now. You don't bet against Greg Wood. The Sheffield Steel Dogs are hard-wired for the playoffs, and then they will want to go back to back. A bit of an indifferent season in some ways for the Steel Dogs in terms of their league form, very up and down. Them and Swindon between them that sort of sat there in the middle of the pack. I just had a year where neither of them could, we get on sort of runs and would just fluctuate wildly, almost sometimes within games in terms of their form. And it was and you did sort of wonder kind of what the direction was going to be sometimes with the Steel Dogs play within games. They'd have games where they would blow teams away, and they'd have games where they would just have a bit of a brain fart and not be able to kind of do much. Sydney Bears have scored as I'm talking. That was a very, very nice goal. A very, very nice little tic-tac-toe play that's worked out very well for the Bears there. But yeah, the thing with the Steel Dogs though is, like I say, they are hardwired, mainlined for playoff hockey. Stylistically, if we didn't have a league title, and just everything was decided on the playoffs, the Steel Dogs would be at the top of top of a lot of lists every single time, because they are just built for battle every time. Dimitri Zimostra, we know, likes to come up very, very big in those games, and a lot of people obviously talk about some of the offensive firepower of the Steel Dogs, whether it's Alex Graham, who, whether we see him today or not, will be very interesting to see, given that the Steelers are playing. You'd assume that Graham will be with the Dogs today, but also Jason Hewitt, Matt Bissonnette, Lee Bonner, Vlad Volkanovs, of course, who is who has probably, like I say, been one of the real stories to talk about of British hockey. And certainly, if you listen to Jamie McElroy, he's certainly one of the stories to talk about in terms of British hockey is Vlad Volkanovs. But a lot of people do sleep on that Steel Dogs defensive unit. Ben Morgan, who remains one of the best defensemen in the division. John Kirk. Lee Hayward, for as much as everybody calls Lee Hayward a rat, he does his job very, very well. But yeah, that blue line call from Sheffield, especially in games like this today against the Raiders, which is you would assume in the immediacy being a playoff semi-final, and the first time Romford have made the semis, made the Coventry weekend for a long time. It's going to be, this is going to be very nervy, very bitty to start out with. Whichever of the two teams can kind of play, can kind of beat the game open a little bit, will work out the best for them. But if this game gets very bitty and very fidgety, you have to venture it favours the Steel Dogs because of their experience in dealing with things in this situation. Morning to all the 4,000 and counting lot as they're heading up to Nottingham today. Make sure you do say hello to them if you're walking around. But then there's the Raiders themselves. Now the Raiders, of course, have been on a bit of a trajectory upwards, as much as it may not have felt like it at times. Post-pandemic, of course, the season comes back. Romford, they end up with points deducted because of having missed out, had to skip a game because of COVID in the camp. And they finished 9th and they missed the playoffs last year, despite playing what I thought was some pretty decent, pretty entertaining hockey. And this year, a bit of a retooling, especially at the back for the Raiders as well. And this year, better play. Again, maybe lacking a little bit of that consistency, but in an 11-team league, they've managed to push themselves up into 6th place, more than secured their playoff spot well ahead of time, the Raiders. And they do have probably one of the more underrated offensive cores in the league. Now, it would not be unfair to say that the Romford blue line is not as strong as the Sheffield blue line. But certainly, from a net-minding perspective, Ethan James at the back, who is going to have the best hair in Coventry, because Ethan James has the best hair in the league. But he has been on a very, very good upward trend, particularly since kind of Christmas onwards, has Ethan. And we're in a place now where, if this game is going to get bitty, it could be a goalie duel between Zimostra and Ethan James this afternoon, which could be really, really exciting and really, really fun to see. But you can't sleep on these forward lines of the Raiders. Harry Gulliver, Alex Roberts, Mateo Gomicic, and of course, one of the most clutch players in the NIHL National Division, Aaron Connolly. He has been here before. He has scored big goals in big games in the Sky Dome. He knows what it takes to win here, and the fact that Romford are now back at the Coventry weekend, how much is that bit of experience from him going to be able to drag the Raiders through? We have seen before, the 2018 semi-final where the Basingstoke Bison played against the Sheffield Steel Dogs. Aaron Connolly put the entire game on his back and scored a hat-trick to take Basingstoke into the final, which they won against Telford, who we will see in the second semi-finals. They take on the Leeds Knights. Going to be a massive uphill battle for Telford in this one, albeit the Tigers deserve a lot of credit. The turning point for them came when they made a couple of where Tom Watkins made some pretty much desperately needed mid-season moves. Rory Herman finishes his college career early at RPI in the NCAA, comes over to Cardiff. He can't stick it out with the Devils, but Todd Kelman and Tom Watkins have a little conversation, and Herman moves back across the border into England and joins the Tigers. And he has been a real catalyst, but he hasn't done it alone. The extra additions of Tom Carlon and Gareth O'Flaherty, who we now know will retire after this weekend, have also really, really helped just kick a bit of energy into this Tigers side, which isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it has suffered really, really badly from inconsistency, from poor form, and just they've had injury issues into the bargain as well. But some of the guys who've stuck around from last year have really, really made the difference there. Finley Howe still has a ton of potential. He is nowhere near the finished article yet and still has a lot of an upward trend to run here. Vladimir Luka has turned into an absolute machine to finish the season. A really, really big part was Luka in getting some of those goals to get the Tigers past the MK Lightning, who, for a lot of people, will still be a big surprise, are not here this weekend. The Barmy Army will be, but the Lightning themselves are going to have to watch from the stands if they're wanting to get any Coventry action this weekend. But yeah, and then of course the problem for Telford is that they've had this great response at the end of the season, and they got themselves into the playoffs, played their way in, and a great quarter-final win against MK. Tom Watkins remains one of the best coaches in this division because he has been superlative, a lot like Slava Kulikov has, at getting more than the sum of its parts out of the rosters that he puts together. A tough year in Telford, a much tougher year in Telford than years past. 2 back-to-back league titles for the Tigers, and then this year definitely didn't go their way, but they've got themselves back to Coventry. But the problem is that they are going up against both the unstoppable force and the immovable object in the Leeds Knights. The Knights have been on an absolute tear. As I'm staying with friends, and they watch the Coventry Blaze on the regular, so they keep tabs on the national division, but they don't know it inside and out. As a lot of us who kind of look at it week in, week out do, and explaining to them what Leeds' season was like. The phrase I got back in response was "bloody hell," and that is what it's going to be. The Knights have, as we know, the all-conquering offense. They've got Kieran Brown, they have Cole Shudra, they have Matt Hayward, Jake Witkowski, Adam Barnes. They've just got wave after wave of attack. They've got Sam Gospel in net, who is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best netminder in this division. He is the best netminder in the national, and you cannot argue it. You'd have to argue very, very strongly and have some very, very convincing evidence to convince me and a lot of people otherwise that Gospel is not the number one choice here. However, the thing for the Knights is that little bit of inexperience at this level, and I mentioned this when I wrote during the week about the Bison and the Knights in the second leg of the playoff quarterfinal. Obviously, the great big farewell to Basingstoke that we talked about during the week, but the emotion of the occasion at the beginning of that game caught the Knights a little bit off guard. It felt like to me, and they weren't quite in the right headspace to start the game. Now, to the Knights' credit. They did turn that around. And against a team like Basingstoke, who struggled for scoring at times, have not been the most offensively potent, that they could kind of get away with that, especially when you're 11-2 up from the first leg. Basingstoke were not going to score 9 goals on Sunday night. But the problem with Telford is that Telford have proven that not only do they have confidence, they can score. And if they hit the Knights hard and hit the Knights early, especially against a very, very young defensive core, albeit Sam Zajac, great veteran that he is, but if they get hit hard and early, we know what can happen to the Knights. They had that huge, huge meltdown in the first leg of the National Cup final against the Peterborough Phantoms. And the Phantoms, whilst they're not here at this weekend either, they're sitting all nice and warm back in Breton with a cup to hang on to because the Knights had a bit of an implosion and couldn't find a way back in. If Telford can do that early and they can cause problems like they caused problems for MK, who like the Knights are a really fast, really offensive team, like to have the speed in transition, and like to just kind of shock and awe you with wave after wave of attack, what happens there? If Telford can put Leeds on the back foot, how will Leeds respond? And in a big emotional situation that this young group is not used to, what will happen there? And people will say in response, well, you've got veterans like Matt Hayward and Sam Zajac, and you've got top quality players like Brown, like Shudra, like Witkowski. Well, they had them in the cup, and they couldn't bring it back there either. Big one here for Telford is to try and make Leeds play Telford's game. If Telford get into a run and gun match with the Knights, Telford are going to get blown out of the water, and I don't think there's any question about that. Questions, comments, anything anybody wants to chuck in the chat. Make sure you do share out the stream as well. Like I say, we're flying around live. Obviously, throwing the links out myself. Just an intermission here in the Sydney Derby. 40 minutes gone. Bears 3, Ice Dogs 1 there. Lots of fun. Let's just have a quick check. I'm really, really thankful to the National League owners for putting out the news before I hit the road this time, rather than last year's announcement where I was flying up the A30. Flying up the A34 and couldn't do anything about it. I had to stop at the service station. It's like, oh, thank you. That's not insignificant news, so thanks for that. But yeah, of course, 1:30 p.m. today for the first semi-final between Sheffield and the Raiders, and then 5:30 p.m. for the Knights and the Tigers. A bit of surprise from some people that Leeds chose to be in that second semi-final, and ultimately, actually, for Leeds, this is about a mentality thing, and this is about getting yourself as close to what you're used to as possible. With all the will in the world, Leeds are not used to playing games at 1:30 in the afternoon. And what this does, playing in that second semi-final, yes, it does give them slightly less time, but they're used to playing back-to-back games close together on a Saturday and a Sunday. If they win tonight, they can have as close-ish to normal as routine tomorrow. And this is about making themselves comfortable rather than forcing guys to play early, do pre-game routines early and the like, and then having, you know, if you're going to have the advantage, choose to be as comfortable as humanly possible. The Knights, of course, will get the nice big change room at the Sky Dome. They'll get the Blazers changing room as league champions, so they'll come out of that corner there, and the others will have to be spread around the arena as is. So that'll certainly be interesting. But the Knights appear to be wanting to take as much advantage of all of the little additions that they're allowed to have as champions that they're going to get, and I can't blame them for it at all. Also, to have the champions in the Saturday night sort of showpiece. Obviously, it's great to be here, whatever. But it will be. There's something nice, I think, about having the the Tigers, who have been the previous dominant force in the division, and the Knights, who are kind of the new dominant force in the Saturday night game. I think there's something really, really cool about that, and I think it'll be really, really interesting to see. But yes, questions, comments, anything anybody wants to chuck in the chat, please do so. We're not going to hang around for tons and tons of time because we've all got stuff to do today. We've all got things to kind of chill out. You know, everybody wants to kind of get themselves sorted and get themselves ready. So this is what we're going to kind of be doing across this weekend. So we're doing another one of these tomorrow morning, of course, to kind of look back at Saturday. Obviously, not too long because, as a few of you have seen, I've got a job to do now tomorrow. But we're going to just try and have a bit of a little bit of a debrief and a preview and a kind of confab in the mornings, as it were. So if we're going to debrief, we kind of need to talk about this press release that's come out of the National League owners for next year. Of course, at the moment there are 10 teams. Now, everybody's immediately said 10 teams, no Solway next year. Then, well, we all thought there was not going to be a Hull this year, and we got the Seahawks, didn't we? So don't count your chickens just yet before they hatch. If there was going to be an announcement out of Solway, I still think they would make it in the week that they're about to go play in such a big game like they are tomorrow. But let's see what happens there. But at the moment, it is 10 teams to make the start line for the National Division in 2023-24. And well, the first thing that a few of us have been knocking on about for a while, myself included, is that we will have 3 imports next year in the National Division. It is not mentioned that will be anywhere else, as far as we're aware. Some people have sort of said to me, but surely this means all the other divisions can have 3 imports as well. If you're in an NHL 2 team running 3 imports, where is your money magically appearing from? And can some of the rest of us have some of this magic money tree, please? Either way, 3 non-British trained players for next year. No ice time restrictions either, so you could put all 3 imports on the ice at once. What this also means is that this handshake agreement, we talked about it recently, that for the last couple of years of the National Division, there's been a handshake agreement amongst the owners that there would be no import netminders, and that they have said that this is now gone and that we can have import netminders from next year in the NIHL National Division. But this is going to be monitored quite strictly, and they want to make sure that this does not impact on the development of British trained goalkeepers. So that it's going to be for a year. They're going to experiment with it and going to see how it goes. This has obviously caused quite a bit of perturbation for a lot of people. Jordan Lawday, of course, Bison netminder, has played for a variety of teams. Very, very unhappy about this piece of news. We'll just quickly pull up Jordan's. Let's just quickly pull up Jordan's tweet on this one so we can get the actual wording from the man himself. Allowing import goalies in the National League won't do anything but stunt the development of our goalies we have working their way up. Give it a few years and we will be asking to have import goalies play for the national team. Let the Brit goalies play. But yeah, so obviously, a guy who's worked very, very hard in a lot of different places, not very, very happy. Not very happy in that sense with that particular one. I think the thing for me is that we've seen this year that all 11 teams have had British netminders. Has it been a bad thing for the quality of the league? And I think the answer is no. I think the issue is that in the past we've seen import netminding not only have an impact, but the argument from the other side of this will be that if you do this right, it can work. And of course, as I mentioned, I did tweet out last night, the great irony of this is that one of the best British netminding prospects doesn't play in the national division, in Luca Tasadri, who's currently out with the GB under-18s, and he's been splitting time with an import all year in Chelmsford, albeit that's a bit of an unusual case given that other import is 39-year-old Petr Cech. For me, I think there are ways to do this, but there has to be ways to manage it. And I've said for a long time, if you're going to have however many imports, if you want to have import netminders and you're that concerned about British netminding, then you allow it, but you de-incentivize it. You can't, with the way work rules are, they can't say you cannot, you can't do this, which is why effectively it's just been a handshake rather than a hard and fast rule. You're not allowed to do that. Employment law would not let you. But for me, I think, like I say, if you're that concerned about British netminding, you need to de-incentivise the thing you don't necessarily want to happen. You must, and therefore, if you want to have an import netminder, it costs you 2 import slots. As simple as that. And it's a very catch-all method. I appreciate it's a bit of a blunt wedge for a lot of people, but it will achieve the thing you want to achieve. So you either end up aiding British development indirectly because import netminder means that an outskater somewhere else gets a shot on that one, or you go for a British netminder, which, let's face it, if we look at the national division, there's a dearth of talent in there who need the ability to come through. And I'm not talking about some of those older top end guys, with all respect to Rennie Marr and Jordan Marr and Sam Gospel. Perhaps they should have had a shot at the Elite League, but their chances perhaps their ship has sailed a little bit. But you look at some of these younger guys like Ethan James, like Jordan Headley, who really should have been brave enough to start in the Elite League this year. You look at some of those other younger guys, some of those younger backups maybe coming through. Like, what is the nobody has been able to kind of shift Dimitri Zamostra from the Sheffield net. Well, Dimmy's not going to play forever. Whether it's Nick Winters or Charlie Henry, somebody's kind of got to come through there. Matt Smittle, of course, at the Bees, he's got a lot of potential. Tyler Delapatushu, whilst Peterborough lost last weekend and are out of the playoffs, that young man clearly has a really, really big future in the game. What happens with somebody like Brad Windebank, who's obviously had injury issues, but he's got a lot of potential as well. Jordan McLaughlin at Hull and Curtis Warburton, of course, have been on 2 ways with the Steelers, but they need game time and ice time to get better. What's the plan here for that kind of thing? There are guys there that can do the job, and I think the addition of import netminders is a thing that maybe they've decided that they kind of have to allow. But if they're genuinely that worried about it, I would not be surprised to see them kind of find either the handshake agreement will come back, or or like I say, I feel that a move to having netminders cost 2 slots, I think feels like the most sensible and reasonable way to kind of, like I say, have the thing that you don't want, but de-incentivize people from doing it at the same time. That should, that feels like an easy solution to me on that one. The other bits and pieces, of course, we have the roster limits. So moving to kind of an elite league style, and the thing that's caused a little bit of perturbation here is the roster limits, particularly with these underage players, because people are seeing these the ones for the under 21s and under 18s as a bit of a kind of a hard and fast rule. Where, for me, the way I've read this is much more in the sense of we'll have our 3 imports, so they can be of any age, it doesn't matter, and they don't count. And then when it comes to British trained players, you can have a maximum of 11 players, 25 and over, and then from there you kind of work out that you should be able to kind of work out the rest of this. And so your 18s to 21s, your 21s to 20 your 21s to 25s, and so on and so forth, and a couple of under 18s. And where they're setting the roster limit at 20+2, the idea being is that you'll have youngsters on your roster who might be playing in your Div 1 side, your Div 2 side, your under 18s, but that teams are not going short bench because there's guys on the roster who will be from below who will be called up and be used. But ultimately, the 11 25s or overs, that is your maximum there. But that's not going to affect a side like Leeds, who don't have a lot of... they're not saying that you must have this number of players. They're saying that is the maximum there you can have. This is the old Elite League argument with the imports. Oh, you don't have to have X number of imports. Whereas the problem with the Elite League with that is you do, because you can't keep up with the Belfast and the Sheffields and the Nottinghams and the Cardiffs and everybody like that who go out and get ridiculous top end guys. The difference here is that where you're setting a limit on the number of over 25s British trained, it makes you try and be a little bit more creative, because there's only X number of guys of that age and above who are going to be of the requisite talent. And like I say, if you're Leeds, they're not going to put in rules that are going to immediately kneecap Leeds in terms of having just won the title and then say, no, you must go out and get all these older players. So why they're not going to do that? These are the absolute maximums that you can set, with the incentive being that ultimately it's going to benefit you the younger that your roster becomes, and then veteran players who have hung around for a long time will either stop or move on and kind of do different things. There's going to be shuffling around for a lot. There are some teams who are a lot older. Swindon, Telford are a lot older. Basingstoke were starting to get a bit older as well. But your younger teams like Bristol and Leeds ultimately don't need to make tons and tons of adjustments here. What they've got is, what they can potentially pick up is they can potentially look at picking up some more veteran presence who maybe doesn't fit in elsewhere, or they want to kind of add, maybe they lack X, Y, and Z. So maybe if you're Leeds next year, how do you improve the team that did so well? Well, the one thing they might want to look at as an example would be something like maybe adding another veteran defensive presence, somebody that 25, 26-year-old range, or maybe, I don't know, for an example, this isn't going to happen, but maybe say they wanted to chuck a load of money at Ben Morgan to come down from Sheffield to kind of maybe Sammy Zabjak, maybe he wants to cut back on his workload, or maybe he just thinks maybe we just need I'm carrying a lot of the weight here on the back end, bringing these young guys through, I need some help, and bringing in somebody like a Ben Morgan or a John Kirk or a Tom Ralph, or somebody from around that area to bring those guys in. And ultimately it allows some of these younger teams are going to be able to kind of shuffle the pieces around a little bit without completely while still having some sort of reining in of what's going on. But this forces a couple of teams to really kind of rethink some of their recruitment, and like I say, pull some of those younger ones through. And actually, I mentioned Swindon, they do have on the whole a much older roster than some of the other teams, but they've also been pulling through a lot of young guys that started through with those streaming series during the pandemic that they've pulled through. The league format then of obviously 54 games, 3 home, 3 away, which is nice and straightforward when you've got a 10-team league. Cup keeps the same format, but going back to playoff groups for next season, which is what they did, of course, with the 10-team league the year before, and this just keeps up and kind of guarantees that number of home dates that teams are going to want to have. That works very, very well. And it's tried, it's tested, and I know some people don't like the format, but it does work quite well. Just looking up at the screen above me, because Sydney, the Bears have put 2 goals on the board very, very quickly there. Very, very nice work, bit of play there, and that's what happens when you don't pick up a man skating into the slot, I think is probably the way there. Both defensemen are kind of pinched across and not watched the man coming straight up the gut, and the Ice Dogs have been forced into a timeout by the look of it. The interesting thing here, and the thing I mentioned that I was a little bit cross about here, is they talk about collective investment in league development. The teams will agree to invest into developing league-wide marketing, communications, website and stats reporting functions, recognising the significant lack of capability in this area in 2022-23. I think the big thing, and I said it yesterday and I will say it again, they have been incredibly unfair to Joe Scutts in the work he has done through NHL Stats this year when there was nothing at all, and the EIHA as a governing body ballsed up and didn't sort out stats and bits and pieces properly, and all the bits and pieces with Sportle, which you can read about on bannersonthewall.wordpress.com. But to say that the stats, I'm interested as to what they mean in that particular front. And people will say, Anthony, Joe is your friend, and you're feeling offended on his behalf. And yeah, I'm going to stick up for my friend, but they've also made a really, really bad decision here. And the fact that they've said that is unfair to the work that Joe did. If we remember when Joe picked up everything and he was made and he was asked to kind of come on board and do these bits and pieces for the NHL, having had nothing for 2 months. So we were into November by the time Joe picked things up. He turned everything back around inside a fortnight, and for him to not get any thanks and for that to be worded in that way is poor. And I think a few of the people, and I know Greg Wood has poked his head above the parapet from Sheffield and said that they appreciate what Joe does. I think the owners owe Joe Scutts an apology, and I think I think they should do that relatively sharpish via either public or private means, because they've been very unfair to Joe. The rest of it you can't actually argue with. The one thing that it's felt a little bit, the National League owners, where they are much more kind of in that sort of space between amateur sports club and business, they do carry a lot of weight and responsibility on their shoulders, and ultimately it is in their own interests to collectively work together to kind of build the brand of the NIHL National Division into what they want it to be, which is this league that is pulling youngsters up and push and making sure that they're ready to go on to higher level hockey, or to make the product that is National Division hockey as entertaining as it can be. I say push them on, make your own jokes about the Elite League here. But that makes sense, and it's really, really good. And I think this year has been for the National Division has been decent. There's been good bits and there's been bad bits. I suspect they were speaking more about their own failure to have Sportle working rather than read Joe, but I agree, worded badly. It is worded badly, and like I say, there is people will say you're making an inference. Well, if you don't want inferences made, word it better. Which is really easy for me to say as the person who writes has written for a really, really long time. So I don't know what to say on that front. But yeah, I mean, it's good. It's definitely good that they are. It's definitely good that they're looking at kind of, like I say, kind of unifying the brand a bit more of National Division hockey, because ultimately, National League hockey's good hockey. Like elite, I know some Elite League fans will sort of say, "Oh, it's not as good. I want the highest standard of hockey possible, etc., etc., etc." Ultimately, there is a gap in quality. There is a gap in ability and skill level between the Elite League and the National Division. But I don't think that gap is as big as a lot of people think it is. For me, the gap is much closer, and particularly in entertainment value, I don't think it's as bad as some seem to think it is. And I think a lot of people some people kind of poo-poo the Elite League. As we've talked about in the past, this is kind of imports journeyman's league. It's a bus league, a holiday league for guys who can't get spots in the ECHL and things like that. Whereas actually Elite League hockey has, for its many, many failings, has ended up lasting a long time, and has ended up being, sort of quite entertaining. I think the gap between the haves and the have-nots is starting to become much more pronounced in the Elite League, and that's always going to be a problem when you have organisations like Belfast, like Sheffield, like Cardiff, like Nottingham, who are able to financially, and in terms of putting on a product that is walking into the arena and this is everything that you get. You're always going to struggle when you're a team like Dundee or Fife, who play in a much smaller building without those kind of facilities and without that kind of backing. But the gap in terms of what's available within the National League, because we're all rink teams in the National Division, like the ability to kind of put stuff on amongst everything else, what the buildings look like, and in terms of how well kept they are, is the different kettle of fish. But the ability to kind of what you're able to offer as in terms of that on-night experience is kind of down to you and what you do. And everybody's kind of starting from that similar sort of start point. It's not a case of our arena is 8,000 and our rink is like 1,200. Nobody is that much higher than anybody else, really. That you think about the biggest difference, will be Milton Keynes to kind of Milton Keynes and Leeds being the newer rinks down to being Slough, which is just smaller. There's a lot there. There's a lot there, and the National League as a product is still developing. It's still growing, and I feel it's going to get there. There's obviously in the rest of this press release, there's a few other bits and pieces about, about what's about stuff. GB about IHUK keeping an eye on things. Obviously, we've got stuff about Worlds in there. I don't understand the nonsense about sticking in a line about the coronation, because, as you will appreciate, not something that interests me very, very heavily. But ultimately, we have some ideas as to what's coming for next year. Questions, comments, anything anybody kind of wants to stick in the chat. So I'm going to hop off before too long, because bits and pieces to do. I think the only other thing, of course, that we do need to touch on is the fact that the news has come out that Muggins here is going to be part of the commentary team for tomorrow's Division 1 for tomorrow's Division 1 national final between Solway and Streatham. I'd said for a while that I'd love to give that game, and I won't lie, I'd kind of said it as a bit of a joke, thinking I wasn't going to get anywhere near it because I don't have commentary experience. I've never had the opportunity to do it before. So to get the call a couple of days ago about it was very, very surreal, I won't lie. But I'm excited and I'm looking forward to it, and I've gone away and I've prepared as much as I possibly can do. So I'm gonna, you say if you want something, you kind of got to put it out there that you want it. I think sometimes stuff isn't gonna come to you, and I said I wanted to do it because I wanted to do it because I think this game is going to be really, really good, and I think it's going to be exciting and entertaining. And there's me being me, you know what I'm like. Story threads. There's tons of stories here between these two sides, especially after what happened last year. So getting a box seat to be able to kind of watch this and kind of give my thoughts on it is, aside from the fact just like a massive privilege, it's just, for me, it's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully I'll be able to do both teams justice in the moment, because I have a lot of respect for Ben Painter and what the guys do in Streatham. I have a massive respect as well for Martin Grubb and Jamie Thompson and everybody else up in Dumfries. So really honoured to have the opportunity. We'll talk about a little bit more about that tomorrow. I think what we're probably going to do though is we're not going to do the usual end of bits and pieces. We're just going to kind of end things and kind of head on our way. But wherever you're getting your hockey today, make sure you enjoy it. We will see you at the Sky Down. One last thing, I'm going to tweet this out as well in a minute. Today in America, and it's all marketing coming to anyway, but today is National Hockey Card Day. If you see me at the Sky Dome, ask politely. That's all I'll say on that front. If you see me at the Sky Dome, ask politely. And we'll leave that there. bannersonthewall.wordpress.com, facebook.com/bannersonthewall, Twitter @bannersOTW. I'll be interviewing people, bits and pieces will go up via the Twitter throughout the day. Should be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to kind of getting the ability to kind of chat to people. So I'll be interviewing players, coaches, whoever I can kind of find across the day. So if you're not following the Twitter @bannersOTW, that's the best place to kind of go, because the links for stuff will go up through there to kind of pick up on stuff. And of course, if you're watching this live or whatever, hit the subscribe button. We'll check you later. Have a really good